Welcome to my review of Over Horizon for the NES. And this is a horizontal shooter. So in this game you can edit your weapons. So you'll see a little bit of that here. You can choose the homing property. If you want to magnify that and increase that, your weapons will home in more. The bomb property gives your weapons more radius of explosion the more you crank that up. And the laser setting, the more you crank that up, is more power, more damage output, from what I understand. And I'm actually going to make a tutorial on this, and I'll try to explain that a little bit more. I did switch out my loadouts. At the very end of the game, I experimented with more laser cranked up. And I kept my homing at 2 and my laser at 3, which was, you only have about 5 points to give to everything. So you can do that for each weapon type. You have 3 weapon types: laser, homing, and bomb, which is a little bit confusing because you're also manipulating those 3 properties: laser, homing, and bomb. But I believe when you put points into those weapons, I believe it's for each specific weapon. So when it's going to scroll through all the different power-ups, like laser power-up, then you can pick how much homing and how much laser, how much bomb, and all this kind of shit, these different properties. But I don't understand it completely. But you really don't have to. Now, you can also set the default position of your pods, which I set to one in front and one behind my ship, because that seemed to give you the best protection. Now, apparently, if you hold B and A at the same time, you can make it so that the pods constantly rotate around you, like a spinning shield. I didn't know anything about that when I beat the game, but I did read about it. But you really don't need to do that. You can also swap between positions of the pods by holding one of the buttons down, I believe, but I also did not do that. So I was good with just having the pod in front and behind me, so I didn't even need to know about that to beat the game. Now, the game gives you unlimited continues, which most of the game is pretty damn easy if you're familiar with shooters. There's also a lot of slowdown, as you can see, so at certain parts it makes it even easier. The game took me around 2 hours and 40 minutes to beat. Most of that time was spent on the last few stages. That's where the game starts to get pretty challenging. But even the hardest stage, the last stage, has some major exploits. And in the tutorial, I'm really going to show a lot of exploits of the game. I will show some of them in the review, though, as well. So you will see some of that. But you can see how much slowdown. The game really can't handle all the shit that it was trying to throw at you. This is actually made by Takara, which, ported over Fatal Fury. The Fatal Fury games for the Genesis. So they're a pretty good company. They have some decent games. But this is one of their better ones, especially on the NES. I don't even know of any other NES games that Takara put out off the top of my head. But the stages have some pretty cool mechanics. I mean, some of them are annoying. Like on this stage, the waterfalls push you down and you have to fight against them. It's more of an irritation. But the game does introduce new mechanics and enemies with each stage pretty much. So it keeps it pretty fresh. I mean, pretty much what you would expect in this kind of game. But you can see the current can be dangerous. Now, this stage is one of the hardest ones, but you can pull some bullshit. There's usually some semi-safe spots that you can abuse on boss fights a lot of times. Not always. But here, see that upper right corner I found is a safe spot, somewhat. You can use that in the beginning to kind of get behind this guy a little early. And you can use it as a safe spot against the body of the boss. It won't be a safe spot against these floating things, though. You can't destroy the projectiles, as far as I know. So you can use the safe spot to avoid, if you're about to get hit by the body of the boss. It's not a super useful safe spot for this boss, but there are some safe spots and exploits on other bosses that are ridiculous, where you can pretty much destroy the entire boss using them. So this is the final stage. And this is the hardest stage, but you can pull a lot of bullshit on this stage. A lot of bullshit to make this stage very, very easy if you want to. And I'll explain a little bit of that here. I'm going to detail it more in the tutorial. But aside from that, this is quite a good shooter. I mean, I enjoyed this game a lot. I would say it's more of an intermediate difficulty shooter. You see, for this boss, you can stay in the upper left corner, and as long as you have the homing property set to your weapons, you can pretty much sit up in the upper corner, and your weapon will home in and hit the boss, and he'll never be able to hit you. I found this totally safe spot. And you see, as I was playing, I was fast-forwarding on the emulator just to save time because there's no skill involved with this. You just sit here. Now, if you don't fast-forward, it takes several minutes, that's all. It's just a waste of your time. So I will use features like that on an emulator when there's no risk of being damaged. I have no problem with that. I consider it legit. So now you see that bottom path that I just took and I ended up in this area? This is actually one of the previous areas, and that's in the final stage. And you can keep going back to this previous area, and you can keep getting like whatever power-ups you need very easily and power up your weapon fully, your weapon of choice, as well as grab a 1-up down here each time you do this. So I don't know what the maximum lives is because I didn't try to max it out. I only used it a few times to get maybe 6 lives and pull some bullshit. But if you wanted to, I'm sure you could get, at least 9 lives or more. But I don't know what the max is since I didn't test it out. I don't know if it goes into the double digits, but 9 lives is plenty because you could easily take those 9 lives to the boss and just suicide the boss, which I'll show a little bit of in the review. I'm going to show the final boss fight, so I'll show that here, and I'll kind of explain a little bit of the kind of bullshit you can pull. But in the tutorial, I show massive amounts of bullshit, and I explain it more. Here you see me fighting the boss pretty normally. There is a safe spot I found in the upper left corner that's a safe spot until the tentacles move over to the left side. Once you see the upper tentacle moving to the left side, then you want to move back down or it'll kill you. But if you want, you can sit up there the whole time and have your homing lasers just hit the boss, but it's going to do much less damage. And, it's going to take a lot longer to beat the boss that way. So I already learned the patterns of the projectile. So it's easier for me to just fight it this way than waiting in the upper corner. And I still have to move out anyway when the tentacle comes close, so that still takes me out of the position. So it's better just to learn the projectiles for this first form. But it's a cool final boss fight. Bosses sometimes can take a little bit too many hits, but it's not really much of a complaint. It's a little bit tedious sometimes. But the game overall, I would say, is probably an intermediate difficulty. Some parts are verging on hard, though. They're pretty hard. But for an NES game, it's a pretty easy game. It's one of the easier NES games, definitely, especially for a shooter. So it's really not hard for an NES game. I would say it's one of the easier ones. So here, after dying, I had enough lives that I collected from farming a little bit to where I just did a little suicide technique to finish the boss off. And you can do a lot of damage this way if you just want, especially once you lose your. I think this is probably the best thing to do once you lose your. Because once you lose a life, you lose your powered up weapon. So at that point, you just have the basic shot, which is kind of shitty. So, at that point, I would say it's better just to have a bunch of lives and just suicide into the boss if you're looking for an easy win. I was just looking to beat the game, but I explained some other techniques in the tutorial. But mostly what I explained there is mostly what I go into. But yeah, I thought this was quite a good game. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was good. Like I said, it's probably about a moderate difficulty, and for an NES game, pretty easy overall. But it's a lot of fun. It's a good game. You have unlimited continues, like I said, so you always start at the beginning of whatever stage you last got to. If you lose all your lives, and when you do lose a life, you respawn right where you died. So if you have amassed a lot of lives, you can just pretty much sloppily bust through a stage. And it's really not till the last few stages that the game gets more challenging. But yeah, overall, quite a fun game. I'd give it a 7.5 out of 10. Thanks for watching.